Okay, Rose, buckle your little seatbelt, Emily said with a nice big smile. My powers are actually pretty cool. I much prefer them over my husband's. If you asked me to trade with him, I'd tell you no way. Even if he is more powerful because of it, I still think I have plenty of juice. No need to start sacrificing organs. Okay, Rose replied. So, what is your ability? Well, perhaps a demonstration would be easier than trying to explain it, Emily said, as she looked at Rose, her smile beginning to widen ever so much, as suddenly she began to see Emily's hair starting to glow very gently. The same red tone that it was, just add in light. Then her eyes as well. And then something that took Rose completely by surprise happened. She saw petals, large flower petals beginning to extend out of her back. As Rose got up from her chair, beginning to look at her more closely, trying to make her way around the side and see what was going on, there it was. A bud, a flower bud beginning to extend out of her back, just like her mother's. The petals were of course different, having a pinkish tone to them, and she only had 3 petals, while her mother had 4. What in the world? How are you doing that? No. Don't tell me, Rose shouted. Are you Sky Ray? Emily laughed for a moment. No, I'm not a Sky Ray, she said as she looked over to Rose. I'm a thief. And specifically, what I steal is DNA. Whenever someone has a naturally occurring ability, something encoded into their DNA, I'm able to make copies. And by making a copy, I can imitate that ability, add it into my own genetic structure whenever I wish. I can stimulate the growth of anything that I want. I can grow new organs if I need them. If I'm underwater and fighting someone who can breathe there, and they think they have me at a disadvantage, well, all I need to do is grow gills. My body is a temple for genetics, in which I have stored the genetic materials of countless races. All I need to do is copy their genetic code, and once I make a copy, it gets included into my memory banks, right up here in my brain. And from there, it's a matter of simply choosing what genetic layout I want at any given time. I can make myself taller or shorter, change the color of my hair, my eyes, give myself larger endowment if I want. My body is basically dealer's choice, becoming anything I want it to be the moment I want it to be that. I can walk on walls like a spider, grow wings and fly, spit acid, breathe fire, so long as there is something that has that in its genetic code. I can copy it by taking a physical sample, making contact with him, and then I can duplicate it, adding it into my own. So that's what you were doing when you touched me. Yeah, I was trying to make a copy. It didn't work. Most of your DNA was fairly common, well, at least for your home world, and I was able to dictate that it was easy enough to achieve on my own, all of it being things that I already had in my memory banks. The only thing that was new was that large genetic segment that was blocked off, and that seemed to have its own layer of defenses. There are a few things that are more interesting about your genetics, though. Primarily, sections where it looks like the genetics are overlapping in some ways, creating combination abilities, things that are a mixture of both your Skyray and your Okar heritage. Did I get those names right? She said as she placed a finger on her chin, trying to think about it. Yeah, that was right. So, you know what's gonna happen to me once I bloom. You can tell me, right? Emily looked over to Rose. Well, sorry, sweetheart, but you're gonna have to figure that one out. What? But I thought you got a scan. That you could duplicate my DNA. That means you have to know how it works, right? Wrong, Emily replied, with a bit of sass in her voice. Remember, there's a large chunk of your DNA that I wasn't able to scan. I have a sample, no doubt, but that single segment is blocked out. I've in fact been trying to test those boundaries this entire time, while everyone else has been having a nice time eating. I've been trying to chip away at it, and quite frankly, it just doesn't chip. I've actually heard of something like this, but I've never actually seen it. A hypergenetic coil. It's come up in theology when it comes to DNA and genetic structure. There have been scientists on other worlds who have theorized that there could be such a thing as a hypergenetic coil. Basically, that there might be beings with genetics that are so dense that they actually fold over into themselves, that the DNA itself becomes a living organism with its own will, able to protect itself and to take action. It's, well, a radical concept. It hasn't been accepted by a long shot, mostly because, well, there aren't any actual recordings of it. If people do actually have this hyper DNA coil, then they're either so sparse that they're impossible to come across, or they're so powerful that taking a genetic sample isn't an option, either because it's dangerous for the person asking, or it's just not physically possible. But theoretically, these hypergenetic coils can contain multiple DNA strings. Your DNA is basically unanimous throughout your entire body. Your body and all of its functions are based on DNA. It tells your cells how to grow, how to make you who you are, and what you are. But theoretically, a hyper DNA coil contains multiple genetic strands, all overlapping and intertwining. Nobody knows how many could possibly composite into a hypergenetic coil, but it's definitely more than one. So effectively, it's like having multiple genetic makeups all together. There are so many different theories of how that kind of thing could work in reality that nobody's actually sure. It's all up in the air, guesswork. So I'm afraid mine really wouldn't be any different. It would just be guesswork. So no, I can't tell you what's going to happen after you bloom. If that hypergenetic coil has anything to do with it, then you could become something completely different. Or the hypergenetic coil could remain dormant. There's no telling. I don't know what its purpose or function is. If it has a will, then what is that will? What does it want? Everything basically just adds more questions than answers. So, really, all I'm gonna do is cross my fingers and hope you the best, Rose. Okay, Rose replied. I suppose getting wished the best is better than nothing. And your husband has been really helpful. So I guess I really can't ask for more than that. Well, might I ask you for something, Rose? Emily said, smiling in her direction. Sure. What is it that you want? Well, I get a little bit bored sitting around Atlantis. And whenever I go out, well, let's call it star skipping, traveling from place to place, Jax always ends up worried and coming to find me, which sort of wastes time. But I like to see new things and go on adventures. And something I haven't seen before is a sky ray bloom. So I was wondering, would you mind if we stuck around? Watch the show, as it were. Rose thought about it for a moment, before smiling. Yeah, sure, that actually sounds fun, Rose replied. I mean, if it's okay with my mom, I guess, she said as she looked towards her mother for guidance. As long as it's fine with Rose, you may stay. Traditionally, the bloom is meant to be a celebration of a young woman's passage into adulthood. A celebration that is not meant to be had alone. Normally, all the young women of the village, as well as the elder women, would all gather together and celebrate her ascension into adulthood. There would be parties and festivity, laughter and joy, friendship and camaraderie. Girls that had already had theirs would welcome the new girl with open arms. Girls that hadn't would look longingly upon what they can't wait to achieve themselves. It is quite the celebration, and it is very beautiful to see. A young woman's first bloom is the most beautiful thing. Unlike any bloom that she will ever have again, the first is, well, spectacular. So, as long as it's okay with Rose, you may join us for this celebration of her passage into adulthood. Alright, that sounds like fun, Jax replied. So, we're making it a party. Soon after that, Jax called his people, shall we call them, to come pick up the table and all of the things after Rose felt satisfied that she had eaten enough to not only fill herself, but refill that reserve of protein that her mother was talking about. At which time, Jax, Rose, Mayrie, and Jax's wife, Emily, gathered together on the bed of the large Skyray home as the exterior petals lit up, providing light as night began to take the sky and darkness filled the area. So the warm golden light of the petals laid out on the ground gave light to the area. Eventually, fireflies began to gather in the midst of the warm yellow light, buzzing around as they talked and laughed with one another, smiling and sharing stories. And Rose felt very at home, more comfortable than she had felt in a great deal of time. She always felt so different, even before she knew she was an alien. Somehow, she never felt the same as the other girls in school or the other people she knew. She always had a deep sensation that she was different, and originally it felt as if there was something wrong with her. She originally connected it to being sick and needing medicine, but now she realized the truth. But as warm and happy as this feeling was, sitting around talking with people, seemingly with no boundaries at all, talking about whatever they felt like, regardless of how strange it seemed. But despite that warmth, Rose still felt as if something was missing, as her thoughts here and there would drift back to her father, wishing that she had a better idea of him. Her mother's story gave her some clarity on what he might have been like, and a little bit about what he might look like. But, for whatever reason, Rose's imagination simply wasn't sufficient for it. She wanted to actually be able to know him, and the knowledge that she couldn't only made it hurt all the more. Hey, are you okay? Jax said, looking over to Rose. You look a bit down, kid. What's got you looking blue? It's nothing, Rose said. This is really nice, and I'm having a great time. It's just, well, my dad crossed my mind, and I can't help but feeling that it would be nice if he were here. I know it's not possible. He's dead. But I still sort of wish it anyways. I mean, I never even got to see him. There are no pictures or anything for me to remember him by.